What's going on, everyone? This is DerekJ Speaks. Once again, back to you guys, this time to give you a review of WWE Friday Night SmackDown from April 7th, 2023, live in Portland, Oregon. We are still fresh off of WrestleMania weekend last week, and on this show, one of the big things hyped up heading into it was a big announcement from Triple H, fresh off of the hyped up Triple H announcement from this past week's episode of Raw. On that show, Triple H opened the show, came out, and said nothing of note other than just helping WWE continue to toot their own horns and kiss their own asses for their record-breaking success coming out of WrestleMania and all of the big publicity they got coming out of this year's WrestleMania, and slightly alluding to the big Endeavor news that broke earlier in the day. But a lot has changed. Even more so has changed within the company since then, when news came out on Monday night after that dreadful excuse of a show that they gave us. The news broke almost immediately after the show that Vince McMahon made his triumphant return to headset and running things, essentially. He, by all accounts, backstage reports indicated that he was the point person. He was the man in charge on Monday night. He called for several rewrites and script changes before and during the show, as evidenced by some segments being scrapped, some being changed and altered. But Vince McMahon, by all accounts, was back in charge on Monday Night Raw. This has led to a lot of outrage from fans, maybe a very small bubble of fans on Twitter, as the hashtag #FireVince has been consistently trending on Twitter all week. And for people who say that this is just a minute fraction of the fan base, it's nothing to slouch at the fact that that hashtag, or the words "Fire Vince" in some form or fashion, have been trending all week on Twitter consistently. I have logged onto Twitter every single day, and every time I look on there, "Fire Vince" is one of the top trends. So that is a pretty big deal. A lot of people are very upset. They don't want to see Vince McMahon back, even though he is, and probably has been in some form or fashion for the last several months. We know that Triple H has consulted with Vince on some of his creative decisions over the past couple of months. He's even said this in interviews, and in meetings with backstage talent. But now, coming out of this past week, we found out that Vince McMahon was completely in charge of Raw. And heading into this show on Friday night, the big question was, will Vince McMahon still be there? Will he still be running things? Will he still be in charge of the show? And reports came out. We had Dave Meltzer speculating earlier in the week, a couple of days before the show, that Vince McMahon will probably be in charge of the show, but will probably do so virtually, remotely. And then earlier in the day, before SmackDown went on the air, we had reports coming from PW Insider that Vince McMahon was not going to be at the show in person, but instead he would be reviewing and looking over the script for the show from a remote destination. So he was not there. He was working from home, basically, or wherever the hell he was. And apparently there were a few minor changes to the script, but nothing drastic. So for all intents and purposes, we had a Triple H booked, or as close to a Triple H booked episode of SmackDown as we have seen. And it showed with many of the segments. Many stories were furthered along in some ways. Some new stories kind of sprouted out. And the show was paced out in a way that felt a little more natural than we got on Raw. This was a far better show than the one we got on Raw. That's not to say much, because the show on Raw was awful. This one was just average, maybe even slightly good. But I am not ready to just be like, oh, well, see, look at that. Triple H was in charge of this show. Vince, he was just working remotely, he didn't have that big of an impact, so it's going to be fine. I don't believe that for a second. I think a lot of people fail to really comprehend and understand why people are so upset and why people are so afraid of Vince McMahon being back. With Vince McMahon being back, that is another older, out of touch mindset point of view backstage running things, where everything, every single decision starts and stops with him. Every idea, every suggestion that is thrown out there has to be first approved by him or overruled by him. And it leads to stories about coming out of Monday Night Raw where scripts get changed 5 minutes before they go on air. Scripts are getting changed and segments are getting scrapped and everything's in chaos while the show is in progress. You have talent that are frustrated. You have morale backstage in general just at an all-time low. You have people walking on eggshells. You have people stressed out, and you have people not wanting to be there. And you have disgruntled fans complaining online. You have fans disappointed sitting there in the arenas not liking what they're being given. They're being given matches with no purpose. They're getting matches and stories that make no sense. They're getting things that are just weird for the sake of being weird, and things that are clearly only appealing to one individual and not done for mass consumption. And that was the story of WWE booking for several years. I'm not here to tell you guys that Triple H's booking has been perfect. It has not. There has been many flaws with the shows. Monday Night Raw, for the most part, is still not a very good show, and that has continued under Triple H's watch. SmackDown, many times, aside from a few segments here and there, for the most part, not really that great of a show, other than a few things here and there, all while Triple H has been running the show. So I'm not going to tell you here that Triple H running things is the best and it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to this company. But I'm just saying, with Triple H in charge, with Triple H as the guy running things, with his own team of writers and his own collection of people working with him and the connection that he has with the talent that he's working with, it has made for shows that feel more cohesive, more thought out, more detail oriented, more story focused than before. That's just something that I, as a fan, don't want to lose out on. And as optimistic and positive as I can try to be, I have been a fan for years and years, and I have seen what these shows look like with Vince McMahon as the clear, distinct sole focus behind the scenes. And I know it does not always look like that. It can sneak in there here and there, but for the most part, consistently, it does not look like that. And so that is why I am in favor of Vince McMahon leaving this shit alone. Leave it to Triple H. Go off, do what you want to do with this endeavor nonsense that's going on, but leave the creative alone. Even though I know saying that is not going to change anything. And Vince McMahon not being there in person on the show tonight is not going to change anything. He could still work remote next week on Raw and on SmackDown, and he can work remotely for the next month. He is still the man in charge. This has caused great divide. There's a lot of people who think somebody like me saying this stuff is a conspiracy theorist and all that. And I'm not going to go as drastic as some other people, but I am just saying I don't believe a single word that they say. When they say Vince McMahon is not going to be that hands-on, when Vince himself says he's not going to be that hands-on, I don't believe them. Because as of a few months ago, they said Vince had no real impact on creative, and now it's coming out that he does have some. To the point now where he's basically back in charge. And even if it's not this week, it could be next week. It could be next month. It could be in the next 2 months. Vince McMahon is there. So long as Vince McMahon is there, and don't give me the people who say, well, in order for him to work within the company again, he has to abide by certain rules. He'll be breaking the law if he does this or that. Vince McMahon is not held back by the law. If he was, then all those allegations that came out about him last year would have prevented him from coming back in the first place. But he muscled his way back into the company and allowed it to be sold for billions of dollars. And now he's back in control. Now he has what he wants. It's not about money. It's not just about money. It's about power. It's about control. And that's what he has. He has it back. Do I wish all of this stuff is blown out of proportion and it's really not the case? I do wish that. But I also am a very realistic person, and I know in my heart that Vince McMahon is back and he's not going anywhere so long as he is breathing in and out. Regardless, on this show, Vince McMahon, by all accounts, was not there in person. But who was there in person? Triple H. Not only behind the scenes, but also on the show. He came out for another big announcement on this show. It started out going in the same direction as the speech he made on Raw, where it was just more talking about the success of WrestleMania. But this time, he actually did have something of substance to say. He announced that the WWE Draft will be returning in a couple of weeks. He didn't say an exact date. He didn't say a time of when it's going to happen. Is it going to be on Raw? Is it going to be on SmackDown? Will it be between both shows? Nothing like that was stated. All he said was within the next couple of weeks, we will be seeing the WWE Draft. And he mentioned how every single superstar is eligible to participate in this draft. And by the time it is over, it will change the game, whatever that means. It's cool. It'll be a nice gimmick to drum up some ratings for the shows, and it might be good for some talent to kind of switch over and be switched around a little bit. I'm not going to come on here and tell you about how excited I am. Whether it's Triple H, whether it's Vince McMahon, I don't care who's in charge of the draft. I can't really get all that excited about the WWE Draft because the draft implies that guys and girls will switch over from one show to the other and all that good stuff. But we've been seeing for months now people appearing on Raw who are supposed to be on SmackDown, and vice versa. People who are supposed to be on SmackDown, they're appearing on Raw. On this show alone, we had a Raw faction appear. A Raw faction that includes a Raw woman who is holding the SmackDown championship. The main event, the ending of this show, was highlighted by a run-in of a superstar from Raw. So I can't really get all that excited about a draft because what does a draft do? A draft is supposed to shake things up and put people on different shows. People appear on whatever show they want to every single week. So a draft is not going to change that. And I'll say the magical, obligatory thing of, well, once WrestleMania is over and once this draft is over, hopefully the brand split goes into effect and these guys and girls stay on separate shows. We say that every single time these drafts happen, and every single time it ends up getting mixed around. So I'm not going to plug that. Am I overly excited about the draft? No. But in certain cases, there are people who are on certain shows, people on Raw, people on SmackDown, who it might be interesting to see them be placed on Raw exclusively or on SmackDown exclusively and see them face a new crop of talent on the different shows. We'll see. I hope it will be effective. I hope it'll be real, and I hope these shows will feel different and people won't just hop on to whatever show they want to, and I hope the brand split will be in effect. Just like I hope Vince McMahon won't be taking back full control of creative on these shows. We can wish whatever we want to. It ain't going to be the reality. So that was the Triple H event. That was all that stuff. Elsewhere on the actual show, with the actual stories, with the talent, one of the big stories involved the continuing saga of Sami Zayn and the Bloodline. This time with other superstars who have been wronged by the Bloodline coming back into the equation. We started things out, of course, going into the show. The big main event announced was Jey Uso versus Sami Zayn. Big match, a lot of history with these two. On this show, we had a segment where Paul Heyman and Solo Sikoa were backstage. Kayla Braxton was interviewing Paul Heyman, asking him about his thoughts on Brock Lesnar's attack of Cody Rhodes this past Monday night. It was interrupted by Jey Uso, who came in asking where Jimmy was, his brother Jimmy Uso. Not on the show tonight. Paul Heyman informed him that Roman Reigns told Jimmy to stay at home. and watch on TV as Jey Uso solves the Bloodline's Sami Zayn problem. Jey Uso went off screen, and Paul Heyman leaned in and told Solo Sikoa that if Jey does not solve the Sami Zayn problem tonight, then you, that being Solo, will need to solve their problems tonight. So, very vague. You didn't know what he meant, but you kind of knew. Elsewhere, we had Sami Zayn backstage with his tag team partner and fellow tag team champion Kevin Owens. And Sami was telling Owens that this doesn't really feel like it's going to be the end on the show tonight, and that he feels a certain sense of obligation to talk to Jey Uso before their match and reach out to Jey Uso. And Kevin Owens was trying to convince him it's a bad idea, don't do it, you really shouldn't do this, but Sami Zayn was convinced. And a little bit later on, Sami managed to find Jey Uso, and he was trying to talk to him. He was trying to talk sense into him once again, telling him that the Bloodline is crumbling and he does not have to go down with the ship. There is a way out for him. And Sami said that if it takes me beating you senseless or beating some sense into you over and over again, then that's what I'm going to do. And then in the background, we hear screams and we hear a commotion. Sami runs over and we follow along as we find Kevin Owens laid out on the ground with some equipment cart laid out on his leg, and a bunch of referees and officials holding back Solo Sikoa, who clearly attacked Kevin Owens and has now injured his knee. And so Sami Zayn has to go out there and compete all by himself. And he does in the main event against Jey Uso. Really good match here. Solo Sikoa found his way out there early on, and by the end, he played a pivotal point in the outcome of this match, similar to how he did at WrestleMania, and almost the exact same way as he did at WrestleMania, because the referee had his back turned, pushing Jey Uso off of Sami, who was caught up in the ropes, and with the referee's back turned, Solo hopped up and gave Sami the Samoan spike, got him back in the ring, and Jey Uso just hit a drop kick off the ropes and got the 1-2-3. After the match, Solo Sikoa got in the ring, started unloading on Sami Zayn, lifted him up, was about to hit him with the Samoan spike again, but before he could connect, Jey Uso stopped his little brother from delivering the big death blow to Sami. This got a big pop from the crowd, a big rise. They started chanting for Jey. But then Sami, in all this commotion, was facing upward on his knees, and Jey just hit him with a super kick, and the fans booed, clearly indicating that Jey wants to be the one to put down Sami. So he tells Solo to go out and get a steel chair, and while Solo is outside the ring, we hear the familiar theme music of Matt Riddle, who just returned on Raw this past Monday night to attack The Miz. He is now here on this show to save Sami Zayn and fight off the Bloodline. He fought off Jey Uso, hit him with a high knee. He fought off Solo Sikoa and sent him out of the ring. The heels retreated up the ramp while Matt Riddle helped up Sami Zayn, and the two of them stood tall to end the show. Made sense for Matt Riddle to come out here and go after the Bloodline, specifically Solo Sikoa, because that was the storyline reason why he was written off television all those months ago. It was in a match with Solo Sikoa where Sikoa beat the hell out of Matt Riddle and sent him on his way on his little trip for recovery. So it makes sense for Matt Riddle to want some vengeance. Not only this, but it was just last year. It's almost been a full year that Randy Orton got storyline taken out by the Bloodline. It was after that tag team title unification match where Roman and the Usos, they all beat down Randy Orton, and we haven't seen Orton since. Of course, he's dealing with his own stuff in real life with his debilitating back injury. But storyline-wise, Matt Riddle has several reasons why he would want to join the fight against the Bloodline. I didn't pop huge for Matt Riddle coming out. I mean, the fans did. It was a pretty big reaction for him coming down and making the save. I personally didn't pop huge. I'm not a huge Matt Riddle fan, but I appreciate the fact that it makes storyline sense why Matt Riddle would want to go after the Bloodline and specifically Solo Sikoa. And this can set up a couple of different scenarios here. I do not expect Roman Reigns to be wrestling on the Backlash pay-per-view. In fact, I think I saw a report that he is not currently scheduled for Backlash at the beginning of next month, the Puerto Rico show. So, in his absence, we could see two separate matches where the Usos get a tag team championship rematch against Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. And then in a separate match, we have Solo Sikoa going one-on-one with Matt Riddle. Or we could just combine them and do a big six-man tag team match at Backlash, similar to the big six-man tag team main event that we had at last year's Backlash show, where the Bloodline took on Drew McIntyre and RK Bro. This year, it could be Solo Sikoa and the Usos taking on Matt Riddle, Kevin Owens, and Sami Zayn. And then you could hold off on doing that tag team championship rematch with KO and Sami and the Usos. You can hold off for it until Money in the Bank in London. And I think that would probably be the bigger idea. In my opinion, that would make more sense. That way, on this show, you can reduce it down to just one big match, and that could be one of your big main events. I do suspect we're going to get a tag team match where Rey Mysterio is going to team up with Bad Bunny against Damian Priest and Dominic. And if Cody is storyline healthy enough and Brock Lesnar is going to work the show, I could see the main event of Backlash being Cody Rhodes versus Brock Lesnar. If they're not going to do that match on that show, then obviously the six-man tag could be a serviceable main event, I suppose. But otherwise, yeah, I think Cody and Brock are going to main event the show, and then you can get these other big matches on there too. So yeah, that was the Bloodline stuff. Other than that, the rest of the show, we had a couple of other things that happened. We had a big six-man tag team match on this show to open things up with the Brawling Brutes defeating Imperium after Sheamus laid out Giovanni Vinci with a bro kick. So we could still be getting more Sheamus Gunther action in the future, possibly at Backlash. I don't know, but sooner or later, Sheamus is going to get that Intercontinental Championship around his waist. After Triple H's segment, he introduced us to the new SmackDown Women's Champion, Rhea Ripley. She came out along with the Judgment Day. They all ran down all of their current existing / previous feuds and rivals. This brought out Rey Mysterio along with the newly formed LWO, comprised of the members of Legado del Fantasma. This led to a tag team match where Rey and Santos Escobar took on Damian Priest and Dominic. The heels got the win. Rhea Ripley was chased off by Zelina Vega, or more appropriately, Zelina Vega hit a Hurricane Rana off the apron onto Rhea and enticed her and egged her on to chase after her, and she ran out through the crowd, and Rhea was in pursuit of her, so she was a non-factor here. But Damian Priest, off of a blind tag, got in the ring, laid out Escobar with the South of Heaven, and got the win for the heels. I assume only because the babyfaces, that being Rey and Bad Bunny, I should say, will probably win at Backlash. At least that's my assumption. I mentioned Cody and Brock. They did show a replay of the segment that happened this past week, and they cut to commentary where Wade Barrett said that his sources are telling him there's a rumor going around that Brock Lesnar, the reason for this attack, this gruesome attack at the end of the show where he put Cody through the announce table, he F5'd him on a steel steps, he beat the shit out of Cody Rhodes. Wade Barrett says here that the reason for this, at least according to a rumor that he's heard, is that Brock Lesnar is upset over the fact that he opened the show at WrestleMania while Cody Rhodes got the main event. Surely the explanation, if we're even going to get one, will be better than that. That was pretty lame. So hopefully it is just that. It is just a rumor that the announcer heard, and we'll get a better explanation for that. My fear is we're not going to get any explanation from Brock Lesnar, but hopefully if we do get one, it's much better than that. And then we had a bunch of other matches and segments on the show. Ricochet beat Ivar with a shooting star press. We had Raquel Rodriguez and Liv Morgan beating Natalya and Shotzi Blackheart in a match. There was a segment backstage where Xavier Woods was playing video games with Madcap Moss and Emma, and got interrupted by LA Knight, who even in a couple of seconds of a backstage segment on this show still got a big pop from the crowd. You could hear it. This sets up a match between LA Knight and Xavier Woods on TV next week, and also on the show next week, it'll be the return of Shinsuke Nakamura to the show. So all that is going down next week, and that about does it for this show. Like I said, a fine, solid show in comparison to this past week's episode of Raw. It might as well be WrestleMania because, like I said, terrible show on Monday. This one, not terrible. Not great, not fantastic, but it was much better. It was paced a little bit better and structured better, and things made a lot more sense on this show than they did on Monday night. And all I can say is that we will keep tabs on what the future holds for this company and these shows with Vince McMahon lurking around in the background. Whether he's physically there in person on headset, directing and staying in control, or he's on a little monitor or Skyping in or on FaceTime or on Zoom, Vince McMahon is still in control. May God have mercy on us all. Check you guys later.